Well, probably the toughest for me was the flying kick through the windshield of the car. It's probably the toughest.
For decades, the world believed Chuck Norris didn't just survive life. He intimidated it into submission. We laughed at the memes, marveled at the roundhouse kicks, and genuinely half expected the man to live forever. But the unthinkable happened on March 19, 2026, when the legend himself passed away at 86, leaving a void that no amount of internet lore can fill. While the public mourned, a cloud of mystery began to swirl around the specific circumstances of his passing in Hawaii. Rumors of a sudden unexplained collapse sparked a media frenzy, leaving fans demanding to know how a man of such legendary strength could be taken so abruptly. After weeks of intense speculation and closed doors, the medical examiner has finally handed down the official report. So, what did his autopsy results reveal? Join us as we dive into the medical findings that have left the world stunned and uncover what truly happened in the final hours of the man, the myth, and the legend. The downbeat childhood, surviving the wreckage of an unstable home. Long before the world knew him as the indestructible Chuck Norris, he was just Carlos Ray Norris, a shy, non-athletic kid born in Ryan, Oklahoma in 1940. We see him today as a symbol of ultimate strength, but his story didn't start with a victory lap. It started in the shadows of a downbeat childhood where survival was the only goal. Growing up as the oldest of three boys, Carlos wasn't the tough guy we see on screen. He was a mediocre student who struggled to find his place in a world that felt increasingly unstable. The weight on his young shoulders was heavy, mostly because his father, Ray D., was a man battling his own demons. A World War II veteran turned mechanic, his father would vanish into drinking binges that lasted for months, leaving the family in a cycle of embarrassment and financial ruin. This constant instability turned Carlos inward, fueling an intense introversion that made him feel invisible. When his parents finally divorced when he was 16, the family moved from Kansas to California, searching for a fresh start that seemed out of reach. But the real heartbreak was yet to come. His younger brother, Wieland, once sat Chuck down and made a haunting prediction. He told him he wouldn't live to see his 27th birthday. It's the kind of dark omen that sticks with you, and tragically, it came true. Wieland was killed in the Vietnam War in 1970, a loss that shattered the family and changed Chuck forever. It's hard to believe that the man who became a global legend spent his youth feeling like he didn't excel at anything. Behind the flying kicks and the tough guy persona was a boy who just wanted to hide from his father's reputation. Chuck Norris didn't just stumble into greatness, he built himself out of the wreckage of a broken home and the pain of a lost brother. He proved that even the shyest, most overlooked kid can grow up to become the man the whole world respects and even fears a little bit. But while the world now sees an unstoppable force of nature, the man who would eventually kickstart 1,000 internet memes first had to survive the brutal reality of the mats, where he learned that even a future legend has to taste the floor before he can conquer the world. Built on failure, the humble origins of an undefeated world champion. The transformation from a shy kid named Carlos to the legendary Chuck began in 1958, when he joined the Air Force and found himself stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea. It was there, amidst the discipline of military life, that he discovered Tang Soo Do. He didn't just learn a few kicks, he found a purpose that would eventually lead him to become a 6-time undefeated world professional middleweight karate champion. But the road to glory wasn't a straight line. When he first returned to California and started competing, he actually lost his first 2 bouts. For a man who would one day become a global symbol of invincibility, these early defeats were a humble reminder that greatness is built on the back of failure. Chuck didn't let those losses slow him down. He opened a chain of martial arts studios and started training some of the biggest names in Hollywood, from Priscilla Presley to Steve McQueen. In 1972, his life changed forever when he faced off against his friend Bruce Lee in the classic Way of the Dragon. That fight scene at the Roman Colosseum is still talked about today, and it was the spark that launched him toward superstardom. While the world saw 2 titans clashing, Chuck was actually just beginning to realize his potential. His student and friend, Steve McQueen, saw it too, urging Chuck to enroll in acting classes at MGM. Even with growing fame, Chuck wanted more than just flashy fight scenes. He wanted stories that mattered. He turned down several generic martial arts scripts until he found Breaker, and later, Good Guys Wear Black. No major studio wanted to touch the latter, so Chuck and his team had to rent out theaters themselves, a move known as forewalling. It was a massive gamble, but it paid off spectacularly, turning a $1 million budget into an $18 million success. Suddenly, he wasn't just a karate guy. He was the first homegrown American martial arts star, proving that you didn't have to be from Hong Kong to dominate the box office. By 1984, Chuck stepped into his most personal role yet in Missing in Action. Playing Colonel James Braddock, he led a gritty rescue mission for POWs in a film that resonated deeply with the American public. But behind the explosions and the heroics was a man carrying a heavy heart. Chuck dedicated the series to his younger brother Whelan, who had been killed in action during the Vietnam War years earlier. For the audience, these movies were high-octane fantasies, but for Chuck, they were a tribute to a real-life hero he had lost. He wasn't just playing a soldier, he was honoring the memory of a brother who never made it home. This blend of raw physical power and quiet underlying pain is exactly what made him more than just an actor. He became a cultural icon, a man who showed us that real strength isn't just about winning a fight. It's about having the heart to keep fighting for the people you love. Through the sweat and the struggle, Chuck Norris turned his personal grief into a legacy that continues to command respect across the globe. By 1990, the boy who once hid in the shadows of his father's reputation had become a global powerhouse, with his films raking in over $500 million worldwide. He had reached a level of fame where people didn't just see an actor, they saw a hybrid of legends, often calling him the blonde Bruce Lee for his lightning-fast strikes, or the next Clint Eastwood for that signature loner intensity. He spent the early 90s keeping it in the family, working closely with his brother Aaron on a string of high-octane hits like Delta Force 2 and The Hitman. But even with a resume full of silver screen victories, his biggest chapter was still waiting in the wings. In 1993, Chuck traded the movie set for the small screen, stepping into the boots of Sergeant Cordell Walker in Walker, Texas Ranger. It was the role he was born to play, a man of few words and a lot of action, fighting for justice alongside his partner, James Trevette. The show wasn't just a hit. It was a juggernaut, dominating the ratings for nearly a decade and becoming a staple in living rooms across the country. Whether he was crossing over into other shows like Martial Law or popping up as a guest for Randy Travis, Chuck was no longer just a star. He was a cultural institution. He even took his enforcer status to the wrestling ring, delivering a legendary roundhouse kick at the WWF's Survivor Series that fans still talk about today. But even while he was promoting fitness gear with Christy Brinkley or writing books about the secret power within, something strange and wonderful was brewing in the early days of the internet. By 2005, the Chuck Norris facts began to surface, those hilarious, hyperbolic claims about his impossible toughness. We've all heard them. Chuck Norris doesn't sleep, he waits. Or Chuck Norris's tears cure cancer. Too bad he never cries. While some stars might have been offended, Chuck embraced the madness. He famously shared that his personal favorite was the idea that they wanted to put him on Mount Rushmore, but the granite simply wasn't hard enough for his beard. This wave of internet fame didn't just make him a meme, it gave him a platform to do even more good. He used the spotlight to launch the World Combat League and poured his heart into Kickstart Kids, a program designed to help at-risk youth find the same discipline that saved him. He even toured the front lines in Iraq, visiting troops to boost morale with the same grit and humor that defined his career. Behind the absurd facts and the tough-as-nails Ranger persona, there was still that kid from Oklahoma who knew what it felt like to be overlooked. Behind the laughs and the indestructible jokes, Chuck Norris remained a man who understood that true power isn't about how hard you can hit, but how much you can give back. He proved that even when life hits hard, you can always hit back harder. But while Chuck was busy becoming a symbol of global strength, his private world was anchored by a high school romance that survived the transition from a quiet life in California to the blinding lights of superstardom. Even for a man who could slam a revolving door, the real challenge was navigating a 30-year marriage and the secrets that finally surfaced from his past. From Torrance to the top, the 30-year journey of Chuck and Diane. Behind the action hero who could seemingly defeat any villain with a single kick, Chuck Norris was always a man who put his family at the center of his universe. His journey through love began in the halls of North High School in Torrance, California, where he met his high school sweetheart, Diane Holacek. They were just teenagers when they started dating, and by 1958, a 17-year-old Diane and an 18-year-old Chuck were exchanging vows. As Chuck climbed the ladder from martial arts champion to international movie star, Diane was his constant shadow, traveling to every film set to ensure the distance of Hollywood didn't pull them apart. They shared 30 years and 2 sons, Mike and Eric, before announcing their separation in 1988. While many celebrity divorces turn into tabloid wars, Chuck and Diane did something rare. They stayed close friends. When Diane passed away in late 2025 after a brave battle with dementia, Chuck's tribute was a testament to a life shared, proving that even when a marriage ends, the respect doesn't have to. Their legacy lived on through their children, Mike, who followed his father into directing and acting, and Eric, a NASCAR champion who handled the high-speed stunts on the set of Walker, Texas Ranger. But Chuck's family story had a hidden chapter that came to light in the early 1990s. He received a letter from a woman named Dina, who revealed she was his daughter from a brief affair in 1964. Her mother had kept the secret for 26 years out of respect for Chuck's marriage. When they finally met, the tough guy exterior vanished. Chuck described a moment of pure gravity where they simply looked at each other and fell into a tearful embrace. He didn't ask for tests or proof. He simply opened his arms and welcomed a new daughter into his life. The next great love of his life arrived in 1997, and in true Hollywood fashion, it happened when he was on a date with someone else. He spotted Gina O'Kelly and was so struck by her that he invited her to play a small part on Walker, Texas Ranger, just to see her again. By 1998, they were married, and a few years later, they welcomed twins, Dakota and Danilee. But this new chapter wasn't just about red carpets and joy. It was about the ultimate test of devotion. In 2013, Gina's health took a terrifying turn after a routine MRI scan left her with gadolinium poisoning. The woman who had been his rock was suddenly fighting for her life with kidney issues and severe pain. It was during this time that the indestructible Chuck Norris showed his true strength. He walked away from the glitz of Hollywood, refusing to leave her side. He spent nights on a couch next to her hospital bed, reading 17 books to her just to keep her spirits up. He even launched a massive legal battle against pharmaceutical companies to fight for her before eventually choosing to focus solely on her recovery. Today, as his twins grow into their own, with Dakota holding a 5th-degree black belt and Danilee celebrating her engagement, the world sees a man who has finally found peace. We spent years laughing at the memes and cheering for the Ranger, but the real story of Chuck Norris isn't found in a roundhouse kick. It's found in the quiet hospital rooms, the decades-long friendships with ex-wives, and the unconditional love for a daughter he didn't know he had. Behind the invincible legend is a man who understood that the hardest fight you'll ever face isn't in a ring. It's fighting for the people you love when the cameras aren't rolling. He made us believe he could do anything, but his greatest feat was simply being a man of his word. But while Chuck was proving his loyalty in the quiet corners of his private life, the rest of the world was busy fueling a different kind of legend, one that painted him as the rival to the greatest martial artist who ever lived. Behind the cinematic violence and the iconic showdowns was a hidden truth that most fans missed. The enemy in the ring was actually the man who helped him find his path. The 5-decade rumor, why the world thought they were mortal enemies. In the world of high-octane martial arts cinema, there is a rumor that has refused to die for over 50 years. The idea that Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris were bitter, mortal enemies. It's easy to see why the myth took hold. On the silver screen, they were the ultimate opposites. The lightning-fast dragon from Hong Kong versus the stoic powerhouse American karate champion. Their legendary clash in the Roman Colosseum for the Way of the Dragon felt so visceral and intense that audiences were convinced the sweat and the strikes had to be fueled by real-life animosity. But if you pull back the curtain on this cinematic rivalry, you'll find a story that isn't about hate at all, but about a deep brotherly respect that changed the course of martial arts history. The truth is, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris weren't just colleagues. They were actually great buddies who spent years pushing each other to be better. Their story began in 1967 at the All-American Karate Open Championships at Madison Square Garden. Chuck had just walked away with the championship trophy, and Bruce was there giving a jaw-dropping demonstration of his own techniques. When the two icons met backstage, they didn't trade glares or insults. Instead, they started talking shop. They got so caught up in a discussion about fighting philosophies that they ended up sparring in a hotel corridor until 4 in the morning. When you find someone who is willing to trade kicks in a hallway until sunrise, you don't make an enemy, you make a friend for life. For the next 2 years, the two were practically inseparable in the Los Angeles martial arts scene. They would meet up regularly in Bruce's backyard to train, spar, and debate the best ways to end a fight. It was a meeting of the minds between two innovators who were both looking to break the traditional rules of their crafts. While Bruce was developing Jeet Kune Do, Chuck was refining the American karate style that would eventually lead him to 6 world titles. They were two masters at the top of their game, using each other as human whetstones to sharpen their skills. One of the most fascinating parts of their friendship was how they actually influenced each other's styles. There's a common belief that Bruce taught Chuck everything he knew, but it was actually a two-way street. At the time, Bruce had a very specific philosophy. He believed you should never kick above the waist because it left you too vulnerable. Chuck, a master of the swooping high kick and the devastating roundhouse, strongly disagreed. He argued that if an opponent was dumb enough to leave their head exposed, you should absolutely take the shot. Chuck backed up his point with an array of his signature high kicks, and Bruce was so impressed that he started incorporating those higher strikes into his own arsenal. This mutual admiration is exactly why Bruce Lee picked up the phone when he was casting his next big film. He didn't want a stuntman or a mediocre actor to play his nemesis. He wanted the most hardcore opponent he knew. He called his old sparring partner Chuck and invited him to Rome to film what many still consider the greatest martial arts fight in movie history. Even though the script called for Bruce to win, there was no ego involved. Chuck took the role out of respect for his friend, and the two worked together to choreograph a sequence that felt like a real-life chess match played with fists and feet. When people ask the real question, who would have won in a real competitive fight to the finish, Chuck always handles it with the grace of a true martial artist. He refuses to name a winner, instead leaning on a Bruceism that his old friend used to say, showing off is the fool's idea of glory. For Chuck, the result of a hypothetical match didn't matter. What mattered was the time they spent in that backyard in LA, the philosophy they shared, and the bond they built before Bruce's tragic and untimely passing at the age of 32. Behind the scenes, far away from the cameras and the choreographed violence, these two were just two men who spoke the same language of discipline and sweat. We loved seeing them as enemies because it made for a great story, but the reality was far more heartwarming. They weren't fighting for dominance, they were fighting for excellence. While the world focused on who would land the final blow, Bruce and Chuck were focused on the art itself. They proved that even in a world of competition, respect is the ultimate prize. A fighter, until the end, the 86th birthday workout that inspired the world. Whether you know him for the viral memes, the blockbuster movies, or the lightning-fast martial arts, Chuck Norris was a man who didn't just live through history, he defined it. For over 5 decades, he managed to stay relevant across every genre and every generation. If you were sitting in a theater in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, you knew that when Chuck appeared on the silver screen, justice was about to be served with a roundhouse kick. But he wasn't just a movie star. He conquered the living room too, giving us 9 seasons and nearly 200 episodes of Walker, Texas Ranger. He was one of the few legends who could move between the big screen and the small screen without ever losing his authentic edge. As the years rolled by, Chuck didn't fade away. He simply became more selective. He gave a new generation of fans something to cheer about with legendary cameos in Dodgeball and The Expendables 2, proving that he still had that unmistakable screen presence. And when the internet took over, he leaned into his own legend, embracing the Chuck Norris facts that turned his tough guy persona into a global cultural phenomenon. He was a man who could carry a series on his back and carry a meme with a smile, always keeping his feet on the ground, even as his legacy reached the stars. But every great story eventually reaches its final chapter. The world stood still on March 20th when it was announced that the martial arts icon had passed away at the age of 86. The news came as a shock, especially since he had been hospitalized just 1 day earlier in Hawaii. Chuck had been enjoying a stay at his longtime vacation home on the island of Kauai, a stunning $7 million retreat known as Paradise Island Ranch. It was a place meant for peace and relaxation, a 3-bedroom sanctuary surrounded by the lush green landscape of the North Shore. In a move that felt incredibly fitting for a man of his discipline, Chuck had even shared a video of himself on Instagram just days before, getting in some boxing training on the grounds of his Hawaii home to celebrate his 86th birthday. He looked to be in good spirits, showing the world that even at 86, the heart of a fighter never stops beating. But a sudden medical emergency led to his hospitalization, and while his family chose to keep the specific circumstances private, they shared that he was surrounded by the people he loved and passed away in peace. To the world, he was a symbol of strength and an indestructible hero. But to his family, he was something much more. He was a devoted husband, a loving father and grandfather, and the anchor that held them all together. The post on his official Instagram page described a man who lived his life with faith and an unwavering commitment to his kindness. He wasn't just a collection of fight scenes and snappy one-liners. He was a man who used his discipline to inspire millions. While his Hawaii home was a beautiful getaway, his heart was always rooted in the red dirt of Texas. Since the early 1990s, he called the Lone Star State his primary residence, owning a massive ranch in Navasota that spread across nearly 550 acres. With 17 bedrooms and a main house larger than 20,000 square feet, it was a place big enough to hold the legacy of a man who lived life to the fullest. It was there, among the nature and the wide open spaces, that he felt most at home, living near his brother Aaron and building a life away from the Hollywood noise. Finding that sense of home was a hard-won victory for Chuck. Although he lived in California at the start of his career, he spent much of his childhood bouncing around different locations, which made it difficult for him to ever feel truly rooted. In his 1988 memoir, The Secret of Inner Strength, My Story, he admitted that his father's struggle with alcohol deeply affected his early years. He recalled that tippy-toeing around a house where someone was liable to blow up at any moment was an exhausting way to grow up. But Chuck didn't let that tension define him. After high school, he joined the Air Force and headed to Korea, where he took up karate, a skill that transformed him from a shy kid into a world-class champion and eventually a cinematic icon. When the news of his passing at age 86 broke in March 2026, it felt like the end of an era, though the details of the medical emergency that led to his hospitalization in Hawaii remain private. His family made it clear that he was at peace and surrounded by love. It was a quiet end for a man who had lived such a loud and legendary life. Chuck wasn't just a fighter, he was a man who bridged worlds. He formed deep friendships with high-profile figures ranging from former U.S. President George H.W. Bush to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The George and Barbara Bush Foundation remembered him for the warmth and friendship he offered everyone, proving that his real power wasn't in his fists, but in his character. His peers in the action world were just as moved. Sylvester Stallone called him all-American in every way, while Jean-Claude Van Damme shared that he had respected Chuck since their earliest days together. Perhaps the most touching window into the real Chuck Norris came from his daughter, Danilee. To her, he wasn't the invincible Texas Ranger. He was her safe person. She shared that behind the warrior exterior was a man who cared for people with immense tenderness. He had been her protector from the second she was born, and to her, he was simply Dad. Chuck Norris spent 86 years proving that you can take a fractured beginning and build something unbreakable. He turned the discipline of the dojo into a life of faith, service, and family. We might remember him for the jokes about his indestructible nature, but the real fact is that he was a man who found the roots he was always searching for, not in a piece of land, but in the hearts of the people he loved. He didn't just level up, he finished the game as a true hero. What Chuck Norris movie is your favorite to this very day? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.